webinars are made possible thanks to generous donor support. If you'd like to contribute, please visit our website, autism.org.
Hello, everyone. I want to thank you for being here tonight. My name is Cheryl Widman, and I'm an executive committee member of the World Autism Organization, which we affectionately refer to as WAO. The WAO was established in response to requests from organizations throughout the world to establish an international network that could provide a global response to the needs of a burgeoning number of autistic children and adults and their families. With support by Autism Europe, the WAO formed in 1998 with the overarching mission of improving the quality of life of people with autism and their families. The WAO advocates for quality services for people all over the world with ASD and encourages global sharing of resources, collaboration, and active partnerships, as well as promoting research across the globe. The World Autism Organization's collaboration with the Autism Research Institute is one example of a relationship to extend the reach of the organization across the globe. To explain a little more about who we are at the World Autism Organization, our objectives include to promote among all people and nations the highest possible quality of life for people with autism and their families. We want to strengthen the self-awareness of persons with autism and to develop their self-determination skills, to advance the rights of people with autism and their family without regard to nationality, race, gender identity, or creed, by securing on their behalf from all possible sources the provision of support, residential, educational, training, employment, and health services. To create a common bond of understanding among persons with autism, their parents, and their families throughout the world, of which I am one. And to promote the interests of persons with autism and their families by bringing about cooperations among organizations. And then finally, to promote the highest possible level of knowledge and competency among professionals of autism, encompassing the most current scientific information and practices. And now, Dr. Steve Edelson.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl. First, let me tell you a little bit about the Autism Research Institute. We are actually the oldest research organization in the autism field. Pioneering researcher Dr. Bernard Remlin founded ARI in 1967, that is 54 years ago. As many of you know, Dr. Remlin changed the field from a kind of naive view that autism was caused by bad parenting to a genetic and neurological condition. ARI funds research, sponsors an international support group network, as well as a science network, organizes think tanks, publishes original articles, and produces original videos and webinars, and a lot more. You can learn more about ARI at www.autism.org. As for today's speaker, I have tremendous respect for Dr. Wenn Lawson. We first met 4 or 5 years ago, and he has supported ARI in many ways since. Wenn, I want to thank you publicly for your thoughts and advice about autism. Although I've been in the field for over 40 years, I always learn a great deal when I hear you present. Dr. Lawson will be talking about the need for those on the spectrum to be active participants in all phases of autism research. This is long overdue in the field. I view this talk as a historical step forward in making this a reality. So please, will you all join me in welcoming Dr. Wenn Lawson. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, and thanks to everybody for for joining in to take part in this webinar. This topic is talking about co-production, which is the very absolute foundation for autism research. It should always be nothing about us without us. Capacity building to enable the benefits of participatory research. Co-production is the sort of title of this talk, and I'm going to take us through some slides, show a couple of videos, and share this topic with you. The Autism CRC, which I'm very much part of, will have their webpage at the end, on the end slide, so you can read more about us. But here in Australia, Autism CRC is the body for bringing together autistic people, researchers, issues to do with employment, school, education, a whole heap of things that you can read about should you wish to. So co-production and nothing about us without us means jointly working together. Co-production is not just a word, it's not just a concept. It is a meeting of minds coming together to find a shared solution. In practice, it involves people who use services being consulted, included, and working together from the start to the end of any project that affects them. So from A to Z, autistic people are involved, and it's not just autistic people who can talk, it's autistic people across the spectrum. When I think of a spectrum, really autism, I don't think of a linear line. I think of a circular coloured disc where we all fit and have skills as well as difficulties in a variety of different ways. So I've got this black bar at the top here. I don't know if I can make it move, just so I can see some of this a bit more. Not really, but never mind. Participatory research comparing to traditional methods. It's very, very different. Traditionally, in research, it's been one researcher who perhaps brings a team together, multiple subjects. The researcher instructs those subjects. The researcher collects data. So this could be 2 or 3 researchers working as a team. They collect data from subject performance. Those researchers analyze the data. They then inform the discussion from the analyzed results. And that's traditionally how research has been set out. The topic of research based on whatever that is, but the subjects were often us as autistic people. And I can remember how I felt as a subject in several research studies. I always wondered what the outcome was. I always wondered what happened to the information I shared. I wondered about a lot of things, and I never really found out about that. There was the occasional research person or research topic I was part of that might email me and say if I would like to know the outcome, but it wasn't kind of just automatically considered. And more than often, I never knew the outcome of the research. I had shared my personal information with those researchers. What happened to them? So participatory methods are quite different. Include focus groups, multi-stakeholder meetings, participatory inquiry, action research, oral testimonies, story collection as a foundation for collective analysis. Notice the word collective. Photo, digital stories, photo voice, and we recently ran a complete study on quality of life in autism. Through that, the use of photo voice, that means people were instructed on how to take some photos, chose to choose photos that have meaning for them, to do with their quality of life, and then those photos were put together into an art gallery presentation that is online and people can visit and watch. And it's just totally amazing to see the difference that this group made in sharing about their quality of life compared to when we look at QUAL, or the quality of life questionnaire that is around, that looks at quality of life completely differently from the eyes of the autistic person compared to the eyes of the researcher and the researchers involved with that particular project that were not autistic. Drawing, essay writing competitions, participatory video and immersions. These are all aspects of participatory methods, very different to traditional. If I just click on that bit, then the slide will probably move forward. Yeah, but co-researching together in participatory or co-produced research, participants have total control over the research agenda. We're all in this together, the process and the actions. The process is not dominated by any one person, but we're all in it together. Now you can already see, can't you, from this, there's going to be some issues. As autistic people, we run out of spoons pretty quickly. That means we run out of energy. We might not be good face to face. We might not find it very easy to think on the spot. There are all sorts of issues which we'll talk about as we go through this study. But all of this has to be accommodated, from agreement on the topic to research, to methods for inquiry, to the process of acquisition and analyzing the data, to actioning any outcomes. All in this together, so it's totally all a joint affair. No one person has power over another. So when you're working as autistic people with non-autistic people, this is very, very interesting. And I'll tell you a bit about what happened when we brought some people together. But just to give you another pictorial view of co-production, I'll play this short video.
As we grow up, we learn that doing things with other people is usually better than doing things on our own. More effective, more meaningful, more efficient, more satisfying. It's the same idea at the heart of co-production. Co-production is a way of thinking about public services. It believes it's better for professionals to design services with communities than provide services to them. That way, people in the community turn from passive recipients into active partners, with professionals supporting change, not delivering it. Now here's the thing. Co-produced services have been around for a while. One example? Neighbourhood Watch, a service designed by the community, run by the community, answering needs defined by the community, and supported by the professionals in blue. Co-production in action. There's practical common sense to co-production, but co-produced services are also based on principles that services should be co-owned between state and citizen, that all people have something of value to contribute, and that the process of designing a service should start by tapping into these things, looking for ways to use them and help people flourish. Now, what people can contribute might not have monetary value. They could be kindness or willingness to care for someone, for example. But that's one of the great things about co-production. It assigns value to these fundamental human gifts, not valued in the money economy, but essential for all of us to coexist. The core economy. Co-production is important now more than ever. Public services are under huge strain. Co-production is the best way to make these services more economical in the long run and better for the people they serve. More effective and relevant, since service users help design their own services. More sustainable too, since engaging communities to plan their own services encourages buy-in and ownership. And that's before the knock-on effect. In co-produced services, people participate, confidence grows, networks strengthen, ticking all the boxes for community resilience and a greater sense of well-being. The impact is massive. In Falmouth, Cornwall, co-produced community programmes reduced unemployment by 71% and reduced postnatal depression by 70%. In Glencorch, South Wales, a co-produced strategy for community safety reduced crime rates from the highest in the area to the lowest. In Ely and Caira, Cardiff, time credits have had such an energising effect that 600 people have contributed 12,000 hours of time in 1 year. We can start making these results more common. The first step? Building the principles of co-production into our organisation's visions. So when faced with a new challenge, our first question is no longer, what do people need from us? It's, what can everybody give? How can we plug this gap together? A small change for now, a huge step for the future. As we...
Okay, so although that video focused on services, when we're thinking about research, co-production, all of those elements that were echoed in the video absolutely apply. Absolutely apply. I work with the CRC, and I often do stuff which is called for in kind. So I give my time, for example, and they'll, before COVID anyway, would have paid for me to fly up and give a talk somewhere that shared in some of the work that we were doing, for example. So there's lots of ways to give and to share resources to come together for research. So what co-production isn't, it isn't one person's idea that others are invited to share in some aspects of, but the boss delegates. It isn't involving another person in the beginning, but not fully keeping them in the loop. You conclude that they don't need to be involved in everything. That's not okay. Sharing a research project proposal, staying on board, staying through the project, but not sharing in a dissemination in the finished product, that's not okay either. So those are more connected to traditional ways we would have done, or we would have committed to research in the past. But that's not what co-production is. It's much more about partnerships. Now, can a partnership be a partnership if it's not equal? Can we have equality between autistic and non-autistic people? We need to think how we can ensure an equal and equitable partnership and then make it happen. So, for example, in the projects I've recently been involved in, we've been involved as 4 I can think of. One was looking at school experience of school people at school in here in Australia, and that was across the lifespan. The other was quality of life with the photo voice issues there that we were looking at. What is, from the autistic perspective, quality of life? Another one was talking to parents and children about their experience of cooperating with school. Was that happening? What was their experience? But in all of these, oh, and another one was working with refugees and their experiences. So like an oral history. But in all of these, it's been nothing about me without me. So people who are representing their story are sharing, designing, putting together interview questions, carrying out interviews, bringing back the results from those interviews. And we have weekly meetings, sometimes twice a week, where we share all together what this process means. Now, because we've got autistic people and non-autistic people with very different needs, the question of equity rather than equality came through pretty fast, pretty quickly. So things like some of the autistic people needing fidget toys. I got some here, but you can't see these probably. But this is Simon, and he's a soft toy. We got Dog here, and Dog is a lovely smooth head, but he lights up and goes various colours. I've got several things like a spinner. I've got this glossy stuff down here. People did colouring on adult colouring books and things like this. During the process of the meeting, we had to teach and learn together from each other how to share in some of those skills, how to turn up on time, how not to have a child in a meeting or a dog or answer the phone. There were lots of little things that we had to tweak about and ethics and stuff like this. We had to go over and learn together. So we thought one of the best things we could do is set up a research academy where people could come and spend 3 days. We started off with 5 days initially, but that was a little bit long. Spend 3 days together, and I'll talk a bit more about this later on, where we could benefit from each other's understanding on these sorts of things. We needed to make sure that this could happen, and that it could happen well. So with the Australian Autism Research Cooperative Research Centre, we held our first research academy in 2015. And as I said, that went for 5 days, and we brought people, autistic people from all over Australia. We paid for their flights and accommodation and their time. and we got together and we sought to share over those 5 days the basic principles of research. And we set a project during this time, and that project was to write a visual dictionary of research terminology, break it all down to make sense of terms like, qualitative and quantitative methods in research, interviews, looking at the sort of way that universities are established, and ethics, and a number of things that we all had to present to the academy. And we had a whiteboard, we had a parking lot where questions that didn't get answered on the day, we could park to make sure we did cover them. But it was completely nothing about me without me. The reason that first one was too long, 5 days away from home, 5 days away from your usual routine, 5 days of constant change. By late on day 4, people were flagging. But this was all good, because I say good because it's not good that they were flagging, but it's good that we could learn together, so then we could modify it so that the future research academies, we had 3 days together, learning about research terms, method, ideas, practice, dissemination, etc. And we brought researchers who were not autistic people, and this was a big thing for them, together with the autistic individuals on neutral turf. Now, if you've been, as an autistic person, a subject, we actually uncovered a lot of damage from previous research that had been done to people, because they just felt used, really, and hurt by a number of things. And we had to have a couple of hours, people were sitting on beanbags with their fidget toys and stuff. We had to sort of debrief on some of that, get past some of that, and give a sense of value back into the community that we were all part of. And that took a bit of time. When the researchers came in, they were almost a bit scared to come and meet the autistic people, not as subjects, but as equals, to share together. And we put people in, we didn't put, but we kind of organized it so that we drew numbers out of hats and so on. So we had groups, like 4 groups of autistic adults and 1 researcher on a table. And then we did a sort of a diamond, particular piece of work together where researchers could say what their thoughts were about autism. The pieces of paper like a tragedy, it's an epidemic, it's worse than cancer, it's terrible things to say. It's an opportunity, whatever the words were. And people ranked those and what they thought about autism. It was very, very telling, because until you know how you see and feel about autism yourself, working in autistic research, in research with autistic people, is going to be a challenge, because you may not have those positive attitudes that we need to be bringing in. So this is really quite an understanding thing. So then the autistic people had a chance to talk about some of the things that they feared or that they were worried about would impact negatively on their research. So practically what they might need. So to work hard to focus on processing, I might prefer to read ahead of any meeting. So for some autistic people, they need to read notes, have their lists, read ahead and be prepared. For me, that doesn't work as an autistic person, because I ruminate over what I'm reading and then I can't focus on what I need to be saying. So it was important to work out what each individual needs. Some might prefer to join with others over Skype or Zoom rather than in person. And of course, the last 2 years with COVID have been really interesting, because all of our meetings have been over Zoom. I might work best when I don't attend with others, therefore we might think of alternatives. So some people in our team worked best by not being physically present, or if they did share with us over Zoom, they might have their video off and just be listening, this sort of thing. We can facilitate co-production by accommodating individual needs, things like sensory processing time. What are the most comfortable circumstances for the whole team? And it was interesting because some of the non-autistic people, the researchers, were able to say, I actually have some of those things happening for me too. I've never had an opportunity to share this with anyone before, but actually, I prefer whatever it was they preferred. And they were given a voice to be able to say what they needed as well. So autistic researchers, we come in all shapes and sizes. We may be verbal and interactive. We may be quiet. I need time to think and to process information. Now, that's really important because a team meeting as a researcher can go very fast and can move really quickly. And there's no time to process. A person might sit there and nod and apparently be giving signals out that this is all fine. And then it's in one ear and out the other. They're not actually processing this at all. As autistic people, words can take longer for us to think about and to process. So it was important that we had those times for processing built in to our meetings. We have a wealth of knowledge and experience to share in ways that suit us, and we had to work out each person's ways for sharing in the team. Some people were really good at taking notes. I mean, this is true for any team, but we still had to work this out. Some people were really, really good at the technical stuff. Others were really good at noticing when somebody needed a break. So we nominated people to be able to say, okay, time for a drink, folks, or loo break, or whatever it was. These things were built in. We bring perspectives to enrich the research process in ways that only autistic researchers can. And we actually give authenticity and credibility to the work in ways not available if we're not included. And research itself that's been published quite recently is showing this to be so. Communication, sometimes it's hard to notice when others are attempting to tell me something. This is what one of the people in the academy said, like my time to talk or time for you to stop. Sometimes we can, as autistic people, we can kind of get on a horse and keep going with a particular topic. So we had things like timers, so that, okay, we've got 10 minutes, folks, start to go and stop, this kind of thing. Some of us, like me, use a speaking clock, for example, on my laptop monitor, because it's not likely to notice someone putting up a hand or notice for time. So I've got speaking clocks that will that I can program, and that will tell me a number of things that I needed to know or to do, and that I pre-programmed it. If I'm actually in a meeting, I may not notice some of those usual things that people pick up through body language and facial expressions. So we made sure that we had things that we could wave, not just a hand up, but that were prominent, that we could notice. And it's about what works for you, because we're all so different. So we made sure that we checked in, asked questions, double checked, put those things into practice, and then reassess, because over time, as people got comfortable with us, some of those needs changed. So we were constantly monitoring with each other various needs that we had. My own experience, I shared a bit before on co-production. The first time that I was invited to share my story with a group, they were researching on autistic adults. I wasn't treated as an equal at all. I received a bunch of flowers rather than being paid for my time. So we make sure in our research that the autistic researchers are paid exactly the same as non-autistic researchers, that equality and equity is financial as well. Being given a bunch of flowers at this particular event while the others were paid, I remember thinking, well, of course I shouldn't be paid like them, because I am autistic and I'm just sharing about autism, so I shouldn't be paid. But that's actually not the right way to think about this, because it means I wasn't valuing myself. So we have to set pay scales. When we look at funding, we have to look at how we'll disseminate that money. We have to make sure that we're not overextending, that we're setting limits, and those things were important. So that the research project in time probably took us a little bit longer with most of our projects than the university said, you know, you've got a year is funding, do this in a year. But we committed to the fact that we would need to spend a bit more time. So even though the money ran out, we had like 2 weeks over, for dissemination and for publication of papers and things. We knew that that was going to happen, and we allowed for that. Knowing what my topics are, keeping up to date. So as a researcher, I need to be in the research field, researching the things that I need to be exploring. So I've got knowledge, up-to-date knowledge to contribute, and all of those sorts of things were talked about in our groups together. So actions definitely speak louder than words. How? Okay, so we can talk about this in theory, but how will we actually engage in research? What does inclusive practice mean? For you, people listening to this, what does it mean for you? How will we help our academics and our universities take this up? So we have to transform how researchers do research. We've got to get into that core way of thinking to change how we do research. Meaningful and inclusive partnership with autistic people. What's that going to mean? What will it look like? How can we plan for this? How can we allow for it? We certainly need to challenge our own thinking because it is so different. We have other groups in the world out there working together, people with Down syndrome, people that are wheelchair users, and we make the accommodations that are needed so that we can make our research together accessible. And it's the same with autistic people. And there's quite a different set of needs in autism. Some of those are very sensory. We went through and cut up bits of felt, put underneath with sticky sides. Once I put them underneath the chair legs so they didn't make a noise when they moved across the floor. We had bean bags for people to sit about in. We also had sessions that were being recorded, as in like online, so someone could join from their hotel room when we were in the academy. If they weren't able to be there physically, they could join a distance, which is now common, of course, because of COVID. So whatever the challenges are, we need to work these out together because ultimately our research will be much better off for it. So I'll just play you this one. These are English, these two videos, but their principles are worldwide.
I think anybody can participate, but co-production is about joint power, joint working, you know, genuine coming together and respecting each other's areas of expertise and making joint decisions. I think participation is simply bums on seats, somebody happened to be there.
We all know that there's many different ways that you can consult and have service user involvement, but it doesn't mean to say that you have shared that power. It doesn't mean to say that you've really taken on board what people say. You've just listened to what people say, but you can then ignore it if you want to. Whereas co-production, you can't ignore. If it's produced together, then both you as the provider or whatever and the service user make the decisions together.
Co-production is being defined as meaning equal voices in whatever arena you're talking about, whether it's a social care or health arena. Participation, before you felt that you were taking an active part, but I participated for a number of years now, and in some of these arenas I felt I've been hitting my head against a brick wall. Whereas now, I think with this emphasis, and certainly in Sky, you feel that your voice is being heard.
Co-production, I'd say, includes participation and takes it further. So it's not just consulting people at an early stage of development of a project, for example. Co-production is about involving everybody concerned from the start to the finish.
The very first stage is you sit down with the people who have who are stakeholders in that particular area and develop the whole project together from that point, rather than coming in at a later stage and saying, well, we're running this project, now we'd like you to participate in it.
Participation is really about consultation or sort of people taking part, whereas co-production is doing things together in an equal partnership. So there's a big difference, and it's a big shift. And I think co-production in its truest sense is something to aspire to sort of work towards, because it is very hard to achieve, but it is possible. I think services would be social care services would be vastly improved if they were all co-produced.
Okay, so again, hearing from people who have been involved in co-production and separating the differences between traditional methods of research, participatory research, which can be co-produced, but which might not be. And that's the one that involves focus groups and the like, where you have people that you consult and you take their opinion, but they're not completely involved in the whole project. Co-productions, everybody together. And we talk about the people, as in each other. We name who we are, what we bring to that research project, what our skills are. We think about the environment that we're all in and make sure that that is safe and comfy for each of us. Our communication, which might be sometimes having to be typed, text messages, over the phone for some, in person in the meeting for others, and so on. And there has to be continuity as we are completely all in this together, and we are a community. We become, it feels very much like family, to be honest, and we're sharing all together. And when one person isn't really quite well for some reason or other, we all share in that. It's not, okay, you take the day off, come back tomorrow, and we just go ahead. We share in that whole process together, in whatever it might mean. Collaborative co-production requires users to be experts in their own circumstances and capable of making decisions, while professionals must move from being fixers to facilitators. And this is so important. In the past, it has very much been the professional coming in, taking up a project to fix something, and those other people have been the benefits, hopefully, of what they fixed. But that has to change. We have to be co-facilitators. We have to be in this together, totally. So some of those questions are other. What about accountability? If we're all in this together, who's ultimately accountable? We all are. We all are. Well, we need someone to lead this. No, we all lead this. Yeah, but someone's got to make a decision, right, about what to research. No, we all decide together what we will research. So, but someone will make a decision about the actions. You know, someone's got to lead this. What actions shall we take? No, we all take actions together. Okay, but there will be some disagreement. There'll be different opinions. Absolutely. And they are valued, totally valued. As researchers, we won't always agree. So we will take a vote. We will make this a democratic process, etc. In the past, traditional research has been the person at the top has the power. And as subjects in that research, we didn't have any power. And there we were, filling in questionnaires, being interviewed, sharing ourselves and our stories without any sense of connection to that research. I mean, and that research I'm sure will continue and go on, but in autism research, it needs to be nothing about me without me. It needs to be autistic people completely involved from A to Z, as I have said already. And this is making an incredible difference to the research that's happening here in Australia. In the UK, it's happening in the UK too, and I'm sure elsewhere. But so to change our thinking as researchers, to move away from that top person and others underneath to being a team, a real team that has equal and equitable status and a say in what happens. It's a very, very different mindset. And it isn't just for services. It isn't just for projects of what could happen in a city or in a village, etc. This is about research. This particular talk today is about co-production in research. And you can read more about the Autism CRC at their webpage there. My webpage is there too, in case people are interested in, my emails are on those web pages as well.
The first one is, can you recommend best and or alternative practices for engaging people on the spectrum with high support needs? So for example, people with more significant intellectual disabilities or who are nonverbal.
Yep. At the Academy, we had 2 young people in their mid-20s, and they came with their support worker, their person who supported them. They use things like light writers, Protocol to Go and an iPad, different ways to contribute. They needed longer breaks. They needed to, I can think of one young person who had to lie down a lot. And one young person I'm thinking of, because he couldn't control his body very well, when he was typing with a light writer, needed a hand on his shoulder, a bit of weight from a heavy blanket or a hand. It wasn't a blanket, but it was more like a soft toy. But so whatever their needs are, those have to be facilitated. We had to choose hotels, for example, where there were accessible toilets. I know there should be always, but there aren't always. We had to have all sorts of other needs. The participants were sent a booklet, so they got to see photographs of their room. They got to see places where we would meet together, who would have a sign with their name to meet them off the plane, because this was people from all over Australia. We had a whole lot of things going on to make sure that from beginning to end, this was an accessible time together. So that if that meant having a carer with that person, then that's what has to happen.
All right. This person is asking for advice. He says, I'm an autistic adult working as an educator in Utah. I'm going back to graduate school next year, and it's my aim to conduct a project involving compatibility with people on the spectrum's brains and martial arts. What are recommendations for setting up a participatory research project doing something like that? So he's trying to bridge that. Do you have thoughts?
Yeah, there would be quite a lot that would have to happen with a space that you can use where you can come together, technology that would have to be sorted out, whether you meet over Zoom because of COVID, whether you share together a space in real time and over Zoom, talking to heads of departments at the university so that everybody's on board and everybody's on the same page. It's pretty much common sense stuff, really, as well as the things that we've talked about in the slides. But it would take a bit of setting up, and then you've got to reach out to the people that you want to be part of this. So we designed little YouTube videos that we put in social media to advertise our project and invite people to join, so that you're getting people that have an interest in that particular, whatever it is. If it's social, martial arts, you need people that with an interest in martial arts. So there's quite a bit of groundwork to such a thing, but sounds terrific. Sounds exciting.
All
I
right.
don't know about how they get funding, Denise, for this, but that all those things would have to be worked out, and the ethics. If you've got humans involved, there's ethics involved. So, and especially if it's at the university, but all of that is doable.
All right, so this one I think you have some experience with. This person's asking about the role of the coordinator, since that's really key. So when searching for a good someone to coordinate among non-autistic people and autistic people, which among them could lie all over the spectrum of capacity, what qualities would you look for? So that's not the boss. You talked about that there shouldn't be a boss, but what does the coordinator look like?
Yeah, okay, well, we had office staff who were in the backgrounds, this was their job. They were trained to send out emails, to keep track of all the people involved, their resumes, all that was happening. So we had secretarial people who were taking that lead, and they were employed to do that by the CRC. They're still there, still doing this, and that's what they excel at. So possibly there's the researchers team, the people all together, and then there's the staff who do the paperwork and the coordinating of how that all works and comes together, sending out the minutes. You know, we're fortunate that we have a paid team of people in the background. We have a technology person, we have a secretarial person, and we have a human, what's HR, human relations person, who that's their job, that's what they're trained in, and they are working with us as our team. So we're very fortunate in that. As time's gone on, and we're not at the academy as such, the other research projects that we're doing, those things are done, sorted out amongst our team. So we'll have somebody who will nominate to take minutes. We have somebody who will send out the group email within the group. But initially with the CRC, we had that, you know, the office staff doing those things in the background.
Right. There's a question about the origins of the phrase "nothing about us without us." So can you talk a little bit about that? And yeah, I don't want to put you on the spot. I'm not sure how much you know, but
yeah. No, this comes from the disability movement. A lot of us have adopted this phrase, but we didn't coin it. So this comes, and if you Google that phrase, you'll probably find out exactly where it comes from. But it comes from the disability movement. The deaf community have used it, and so on. So it's just a phrase that we've taken on board because it should be universal.
All right. How does co-production include those with autism who are nonverbal and do not use speech devices? As a mother of an adult on the spectrum, I acknowledge that my interpretation of her wants and needs are fairly subjective on my part. Some is based on my knowledge of past experiences and responses. Relying on parent or guardian responses might be subjective.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's very, very difficult. Very, very difficult. And this might be a limitation of nothing about me without me. If somebody is not able to show you with photographs, like with photo voice, for example, if they're not able to demonstrate through action or share through word or speech devices, it can be very, very difficult indeed. There's a lass called Wendy, oh dear, what's her surname? Wendy White, I think, who's an occupational therapist from Cardiff University. And she's designed some software games that people can manage to move just with their eyes without talking or any other action, and ways to communicate, which are just brilliant, because we should never assume that just because someone doesn't speak it, they don't think it. Thoughts and speech and getting stuff out there rely on very different pathways in the brain, and for a lot of autistic people, some of those pathways are just offline. They're not working in the same way. They're not working in sync. There's a lot of auditory processing issues and so on. So these things can be very, very difficult to navigate. And I don't know of any research team as of yet that has a person within their team that is severely disabled in so many different ways. We have Tim Chan, and you can research him. He gives TED Talks through his Light Writer. He's severely disabled in a number of ways. Has lots and lots of high needs, and only manages to give short bursts of communication. He's at university. You know, he's a very, it's not his IQ, it's not about an intellect, it's about those other disabling factors that he lives with. And we can accommodate Tim, but for somebody who can't access any of those things, it would be incredibly hard. And maybe some of Wendy's ideas will be mainstream one day, I don't know, but finding means to be able to communicate is essential. And if that isn't happening and isn't available yet, then that person can't take part in the research. So nothing about me without me for that person is not going to happen. until we can sort this out.
Here's a question from a recent PhD graduate and an autistic part-time AAC user. This person's asking, I think co-production would be prepared to handle situations where the academic researcher with a PhD is sometimes one of the autistic adults using an iPad to communicate. In your experience, would the models have been set up for that? Have you seen that actually happen?
Yes, I have seen this happen, but only here in Australia, with people like Tim, who has been on the board. You know, his insights are invaluable, but it will take him double the time, and people are often not patient. They don't want to wait. And unfortunately, some people have this kind of belief, which shocks me, that such a person shouldn't be in such a role, for example. And that really is awful. So I have seen it. It's not common, but it needs to become more so, because there are an awful lot of people out there who don't use speech as a non-talkers. They relate differently through things like iPads and light riders and so on. And they need, absolutely, if we don't have their input, we're not reaching a large chunk of our community. So it's vital that we do. So I don't know about a model as such. It's a case of individuals coming together and making these sorts of allowances and having individuals like Tim on board in their project. And you can watch him. If you Google Tim Chan and autism, you can see Tim in action in a number of ways through things like his TED Talks and just sharing and other YouTube channel videos.
Right. This is a question they're saying, I'm sure that you're familiar with the controversies around authenticity of authorship, around spelling techniques of S2C. Oh, it just jumped, I'm sorry. S2C and FC used by non-speakers who use these modes. The use of traditional versus participatory approaches have major implications for the discrepant opinions about these forms of communication. Do you wish to comment on that?
It's hard for me to comment because I don't use that myself. I've used Protocol to Go on my iPad. I've gone into McDonald's to try and order gluten-free burgers, as in burger without the bun. And they haven't known what I was on about, even though this device is speaking very clearly for me. They're not used to engaging with someone who does not use speech. So part of my activity was to try and encourage them to become used to that. So it is very difficult. We're in new times and people are still not trusting of authorship. Even when I wrote my book, initially back in my first book in 1998, when it was published then, I had academics saying, well, you're autistic, so you're lacking theory of mind, rubbish. You won't know who you are as a person, rubbish. How can we trust what you're saying? And initially, life stories, as in, you know, the name for those stories where a person writes about themselves, I can't think of it at the moment, were disbelieved, not taken seriously. We've moved a long way from that. But accountability and authorship and taking things seriously from people who use various supports to get their words across, including the ways things are spelt and so on, is still a big issue, and we've got to work towards solving it.
All right. Can you recommend best and/or alternative practices for engaging people on the spectrum who have high support needs? For example, significant intellectual disability and nonverbal. This has come up in different ways through these questions, but I think they're asking about engagement beyond just taking breaks. One person suggested movement, so looking for expression through movement or using sign language or dancing as a communication system. Have you seen anything like that attempted?
I haven't seen it in the field of research. I've certainly seen it in the field of community and in sharing together. And you're absolutely right. These other forms of engagement do need to be considered. Getting a university to fund and take this seriously will be very difficult. And at the moment, research tends to happen through university domains and research organizations. But yes, you're completely right. We were so excited with things like photo voice, movement, dance, alternative ways to share absolutely should be involved in research as well. We're not there yet, and I don't know of any that's happening.
Okay, this is an interesting question.
I hope people are listening to this, and then.
Okay, so this is an interesting question. I'm going to read it carefully, but does informed consent vary greatly so that it incorporates all the co-production and language concepts? And do the researchers also sign the consent when they are part of the study?
Informed consent is exactly that. It's that a person totally understands what's being asked, understands what's requested, understands their role. And yes, as co-researchers, we all contribute to informed consent. If you cannot, because the information's not been presented to you in an accessible form, or you are too young of age to understand it, even if you're 30, you could have, an academic age of a 3 or 4 year old, then you can't. That's not possible. And unfortunately, sometimes people are much more available, much more able than others give them an understanding of. That's the wrong word, but never mind. I'm said to have an IQ of 83 on my assessment, autism assessment. It says I operate at the lower end of average ability. 70 is considered intellectual disability and below 70. 83, the bottom end or the lower end of average ability. I have a PhD, so it's probably not true what they were saying of me, but my autism presented a picture to the person who was doing an assessment, and the assessment tools they use were standardized on non-autistic people, so they're not made for us as autistics, and these things get in the way. But so informed consent is absolutely that. The person needs to know and understand and can inform their consent to what will happen. So we have to check in all ways that is what's understood, whether that's in pictures, whether that's in word, whether that's in video, moved out, drawn out in the sand, however, it needs to be understood and and consented to. And if a person can't consent to that, then they can't consent to that.
Okay. So in the conference that you've described, they're asking about diversity. So inclusion of women, different nationalities, obviously people of varied abilities. Can you speak to that at all? Was that part of the focus, or was it not as critical?
It is part of the focus, but it was very, very hard here in Australia to reach. We've had one Aboriginal people. We had a young man who's deaf. We had a person in a wheelchair, but it was very hard to actually get the kind of totally included mixed ethnic race of people, because you take who responds, you put out your literature and you take who responds to that, and some people are not going to read or watch those videos in social media format. They're not going to look at the university notice boards. They're not in the groups that are spreading the information word of mouth. So it is a pool of people that are enabled for these other reasons. They've been the ones to read the information, come to understand it, and contact us back. So there's a limitation, a very definite limitation there. I would hope over time that absolutely this changes, that all those intersectionalities with autism we will reach and people will want to be part of. But this is still a newish area. Research traditionally has been going on for decades, and co-production like this, although it's been around since the 80s, hasn't really taken off until the 2000s, and we're still quite young in all of this, and getting to reach the people we need to. that's not happening in the way I would like.